Hey, I'm Atlas. I'm a producer, and I thought I might as well start doing some lessons on YouTube, trying to teach people uh, just kind of short, simple lessons on production. Um, I get asked a lot about hip hop production, so I thought, why not start with that? We're going to split it up a little bit into a couple different videos, with percussion being this video, the first one. Then we're going to go into basses and some keys and like harmonic elements, and then melodic elements. And then we'll talk about vocals a little bit later. But for now, we just want to understand the simple basics of hip hop percussion. And I say simple, but that's it's a loaded term, because obviously there's a lot of history with hip hop. You know, it's a relatively new genre if you think about it, comparing it to a lot of other things, but it still has a lot to dig through, right? You could listen for your whole life and you wouldn't have heard all of the hip hop music that's been made in the last 40 years or so. So this is my perspective on it. Take that as it is. I wanted to separate these elements, into different videos and start with percussion, because I think percussion is the core of hip hop, right? If you have a good drum beat, it will link everything together. It fuses everything. Whereas you can have great keys, you can have great bass, you can have great, verse, a rapper, or a great hook with a singer, and if the percussion's not there, it's not going to work. So starting off and being confident with that, getting a lot of reps in and understanding the percussion side is going to help you a lot later in the game. All right, so I have this sample project here. I'm in Ableton Live 10. Deep down, all these programs are the same. They're all doing the same thing. And once you get used to whatever you're using, it'll be pretty quick that you'll pick up what I'm saying and be able to translate it, or just do it if you're working in Ableton. Also, the other thing I like to say is that you shouldn't have to spend any money to get into production. You can find free versions, right? You can find GarageBand, which I think might be free, and Ableton Lite, which is free. There's free versions of Ableton, FL Studio, I think, Logic, maybe not Logic. Pro Tools, I think, has a free version. It's worth trying a bunch of things. I did that. I ended up with Ableton, and I'm comfortable with it, so I'm sticking with it. But you can do this stuff in any program. What I've done is I've set up kind of a simple beat right here. We can give it a listen, and then we'll break down how it sounds, why it sounds a particular way, why I've chosen certain things, and how to make that beat. So here it is. All right, this is what it looks like in MIDI, right? One important thing when you're starting with production is to understand the difference between MIDI and audio. MIDI is essentially the notation that a computer understands. So a MIDI note, right, one of these guys, right here, right there, they're just triggering a sound, whether that's a sound that's synthesized by the computer, or a plugin, or it's triggering a sample that's an audio file that you've loaded into whatever program you're using. It's being triggered by this particular MIDI note, which the computer understands. The difference between that and an audio track is just going to be something that you've essentially sound that you've taken from outside the computer and loaded into it. So if I have a bass over there, if I played the bass into my computer, that would be an audio file versus a MIDI file. Very basic, and once you start working with it, you'll understand it, and it'll be pretty easy to get a hold of. So this right here, right, is my MIDI track. I've got kick, which you can hear if I do that, snare, closed hi-hat, a arpeggiated rolled closed hi-hat, right, and then an open hi-hat. And these are all just simple, sound 808s or similar kind of drum machine sounds that I've found within Ableton. Took me about 5 minutes to put this together, and I'll show you how to do that. So what you're going to do is you're going to find, right, if you're on Ableton, you're going to hit Command-Shift-T for a MIDI track, a new MIDI track, or you can go up here and hit Create, Insert MIDI track, right? That'll bring this up, and now you go to Drums and hit Drum Rack. You double click it. That's where you get this. This is going to be where we load all of our sounds, right? The way that if I open up a preset drum kit right here, you see they put a kick there and a snare. Oh, well, I guess not this one. What about this 505? Here we go. Kick here, snare here, hi-hat here, open hi-hat here, and then these are all, other sounds rather. What we're going to do is have this empty, right, drum rack, just the simple thing, no name, and we're going to add our own sounds. And the way that you do that is you come in here, you search kick, right, and then you can go to samples or all results. Samples is good because it just keeps it to audio samples. You find, right, you listen to all these, you find one you like. Let's say we're going to use this. You drag it in, and now you have this kick within your drum rack, and you're going to do that with every aspect of it, right? Snare. Let's just, for example, take this one, hi-hat, like that, and now you've got these different elements in there. The elements that I ended up using were this kick dirty, which is from a preset on Ableton. I'm not sure if you get it in light or if it's just a part of the suite, but it really doesn't matter the exact sounds you use. That's one thing I want to try to get you guys to understand. I've gone to school, I'm in school, I'm about to graduate with a music composition major, and I've studied so much theory and composition, but what matters isn't your ability to understand complex musical forms generally, right? You want to be able to master the simple forms. So when we're here, right, in Ableton, it doesn't matter what the sounds are. We just want to understand what can I do with rhythm and with pitch, essentially, to make something interesting. So here are the sounds I have: kick, snare, hi-hat, open hi-hat, and rolled hi-hat. And right, so if I copy this this drum rack, or actually we can do it right here. So I just double clicked on this session view, right, segment right here, and I get a MIDI clip that's 1 measure long. You have beat 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I've set my tempo to 88 up here. You can do it however fast you want. That just seemed like that worked. So then what I'm going to do is just write in. I hit B to make my cursor into the pencil tool. And I'm just going to do this, which is essentially a very simple kick pattern. There is no hip-hop kick pattern, right? You have to listen to a lot of hip-hop and you'll hear, oh, okay, they're using everything. Drake will have a song that's technically hip-hop, but it sounds like dance hall, or pop, and it has kick on 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? There's no syncopation. And then you listen to JID, and his beats have a more kind of classic hip-hop feel, with a little more syncopation, and then, there's just everything. So this is a good one to kind of start out with, just something to try, and it sounds like this. If I put the metronome on, it sounds like this. Really simple. And so this is something to play around with, right? You can start with this, or you can start with nothing and just try putting kicks, all over. I just did that randomly, and it doesn't sound great, but it also works still, right? You could totally use something like that. And it would work. So it's really up to you. That's where it starts to get fun. Adding, not worrying about the sound of the kick, but where you put it, right? How much space there is between it, how much one kick works off the other. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, we're going to move to the snare, and I don't want to say it's a rule because there aren't rules. That's the great thing about production. You can try anything and something might work that you didn't expect. But one safe way to approach snares are put them on 2 and 4, beats 2 and 4 the measure, and try that first. And then you can kind of work, right, with pulling them off of there. And this is if you're working in 4. If you're working in 3, it's a little different. But if you're working in 4, generally if you put the snare on 2 and 4, it's going to sound pretty good. Very simple, right? Doesn't sound particularly interesting, but it's working. And you could build a beat around this, not do anything else with the percussion, and just add bass and harmonic elements, and it would work. It wouldn't be revolutionary necessarily, but it would totally work. That's what I want you to understand. You can build from simplicity. It doesn't have to start complex. So that said, we're going to add a little bit more to it. We're going to try to add some interest. One good way of doing that is by adding some hi-hat. And so I've added hi-hat on 1, 2, 3, and 4. Beats 1, 2, 3, and 4 of this measure, and we're going to listen to that. Boring, right? Not that interesting. And what you'll notice is that when it hits with the snare, right there, right? You lose a little bit of that hi-hat because the snare is taking up some higher frequencies, just like the hi-hat is, and they cut into each other. So we probably want to add a little bit more, right? A little bit more hi-hat, and let's double it. And the way I do that is I click over here. I remove the pencil tool, right, by hitting B on my keyboard, or you can come up here and hit it right there. And I'm going to hit this, select all my hi-hats. I'm going to hit the first one, or click the first one rather, hold Option, and drag it over. So now I've duplicated it, right? I've essentially subdivided, is what the technical term is, this measure into 8 sections, right? 1/8 notes of hi-hat, whereas I had quarter notes before. I had only 4, right? Divided the measure into quarters. Now they're dividing it into 1/8, and let's listen to that. A little bit better, right? But still kind of boring. So let's do it again. Let's try that exact same thing. I'm going to click over here on the black, select all my hi-hats, hold Option, click the first one, drag it over, and it'll kind of stick into that place, right? Because Ableton knows what you're trying to do usually. And then when you're thinking about hi-hat, right, you listen to, well, I'll play it and we'll just listen. All right, so that's the best so far, right, that we've heard, but it's a little robotic. And when you listen to somebody actually play drums, you could do this. You can listen to great drum, Bernard Purdie is what comes to mind, just with incredible hi-hat work, which is what we're doing right now. That's the right hand. Usually if you're right-handed, the right hand is here and the left hand's here. Snare, hi-hat. And what you'll hear is that they're not hitting with the same force every time. It's not right? It's on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, which creates a more human, a more kind of pumping in and out rhythm, which works a lot better with music because you want a human quality to it. And especially with production, if you don't have somebody playing the kit, you don't want it to sound too robotic. Unless you're going for that particular sound. But here we're not. We're trying to keep a little bit of organicism to it. So we're going to drop all these. You still have these selected from when you move them over. If you don't, you can hit, right, 1, hold Shift, click through all of these offbeat hi-hats here. Now we have them all selected. I'm going to go down here, and these red lines are the velocity lines for each note. And you can see the darker ones are selected, right? Selected, not selected. So these darker ones are selected, and if I hit this as they're all selected and I bring it down, I drag it down, they all get a little bit darker. See that? And that means it's going to be a little bit quieter. So let's listen now. Okay, so before, after. It's a lot better, right? So that's our first step. And now let's, we'll listen to that. And this is the third repetition, now the fourth, and it's getting boring, right? It's not interesting. So we gotta do something to this. I'm gonna come over here and hit length. Under length, I'm gonna change that 1 to a 4, and then press enter. And now I have a 4-bar phrase, right? 4-measure phrase. And I'm gonna hit Command A. You can also do this by just clicking and dragging and selecting. You see this blue selection bar up here. That's showing you what's selected. So I have a measure selected. I'm going to hit Command D, which is going to duplicate it. I'm going to hit that 3 times. So now I have 4 measures of the same thing. And it's the same thing as before. I had it looping. And here you're going to have the same thing over and over again, which is not that interesting. So now we get kind of to the fun part, right? You get to differentiate each measure within this phrase. The best way to do that, right? You could do that with sounds. You could change the samples that you're using. You could change a multitude of things. But I want to focus on rhythm because it's the simplest but the most important, I think. Let's mess with the kick first, right? You can add kicks anywhere. I'm going to add one right here. And let's just listen to that. Listen to the difference between the first measure, right, which ends at 2, and the second measure, which ends at 3. That little extra kick adds a little bit of interest, adds a little bit of tension and drama, right? That's what we're looking for. And so I'm going to go through and add some kick patterns. Actually, I'm just going to take it from this preset that I already made, right, that we heard at the beginning. And I'll just copy this and paste it down here. And so I've just gone through and added some extra kicks in here. And let's listen to what that sounds like. Simple, right? In this case, I moved one, right? So there isn't a kick on 1. It's on the and of 1, I guess. Right, I could have it here and go, but instead it's. So it's just changing up the feel a little bit. And we can do that with the snare too. And I'll take this preset snare that I recorded a little bit earlier, and I'll drop it in here. Oops. All right, so you can see some of these snares, right, the new ones, are a little bit darker, meaning they're a little bit quieter. That's because we still want to really keep the 2 and 4 snares, right? So this one and this one in each measure strong, because those are hammering home that feel of off on 1, on 2, off on 3, on 4. Let's move on. Do the same thing to the hi-hat. And really what's interesting here is that you can put them anywhere and just try it, right? You can always go back, you can always hit Command Z or just delete what you've done. It's worth just trying placing them in any spot. I've done a little bit extra with this hi-hat rhythm that I'll show you. So you can see, right, I've removed some in certain spaces because, and this is something that's a little bit weird, right? When when you're not exposed to it and when you're hearing it for the first time, and remember when I heard it for the first time, I was in jazz band in high school, and I was told that space is what makes funk. And you're like, well, isn't it the drums that make the funk? But really, when you remove something and there's a little bit of hesitation or a little bit of space, I guess is what it is, it adds the interesting quality that isn't there when you just have the same hi-hat the whole time going right? It's predictable. And so having space adds an element of interest that you don't have without it. So let's listen to this. Still not perfect, right? And still simple, but what we're listening for is, will this work? Do I hear something over this, right? And if you listen to it, you get into it. You start to feel the kick and the snare and then the space, and then when it comes back, and that's important. So I'm going to add in these next two parts, right, which are rolled hi-hat and open hi-hat. I'll do this. And these are going to add just a little extra oomph, right? They're not essentials. None of this really is essential other than kick and snare, I think. Like, hi-hat is extra. I think it's great, and I almost always use it. But understanding just the power of a good kick and snare is what I'm trying to really emphasize to you. So here we go with some extra stuff thrown in there. All right. Sounds like a workable percussion, right? So soon I'm going to have a video up showing putting some bass underneath this and meshing percussion with bass and how you do that. But if you're trying to get better at this stuff, here's what I'll tell you to do. Make 10 of these beats in the next week, right? If you have a bunch of time, make 10 a day, every day. But if you don't have that much time, let's say you only have time to make one beat a day, that's 7 beats in a week. Or if it's only during, the weekdays, it's 5 beats a week. That's still great because you need to just burn through trying a bunch of things. Try putting the kicks in different spots. Try and put the snares in different spots. Try different rhythms with the hi-hats. Try making a beat in 3/4, not 4/4. All that stuff will help you. The important thing is just keeping it simple. Trying simple changes, right? You can go complex later, but you have to be confident with the simplicity first. So, like I said, there's going to be bass up soon. But for now, work on this stuff. I'll see you guys later.